Bengt Kristensson Uggla asked me yesterday whether we could expect sonnets from this conference. So I wrote one about the art exhibition at the Gallery Titanic yesterday. And if you haven't seen it, I recommend you to go there so you can understand the sonnet. It's called Ornamented Beauty. The artist's feet leave traces in the snow. Their form is beauty, so is their sense. The open meanings of the script that grow in our minds as through a focused lens. In our memories, perceptions glow. The patterns that we see is called a fence, but is a boat with oars. Through time we flow, we move from corners, finding space immense. In art and nature, ornaments repeat, but when our movement's circle is complete, we find ourselves in slightly altered places. When matter, spirit, art, and science meet, creative thinking looks for interfaces. Together our thoughts will form a fleet.
And now I want to introduce our second keynote speaker, Raphael. Melissa Raphael is a professor of Jewish theology at the University of Gloucestershire. She has been holding several visiting professorships and been teaching modern Jewish thought on the Masters in Applied Rabbinic Theology at Theophilus College in London. She has also been the Sherman Lecturer in Jewish Studies at the University of Manchester and the Hussey Lecturer in the Church and the Arts at the University of Oxford, and the British government's Foreign Office Delegate to the International Task Force on Holocaust Remembrance and Research. She is currently working on a new book on gender idol breaking and liberation. And the respondent is Ruth Sherman, who is a docent of comparative religion and the director of the Donner Institute for Research in Religious and Cultural History here in Åbo. And the stage is yours.
Thank you for that kind introduction, and to Ruth for inviting me. It's a great honour and a pleasure. Now, it's well known that Kant thought that one of Judaism's few redeeming features was the second commandment's proscription of images. After their emancipation, Jews were actually happy to agree with him, not least because characterizing their tradition as the prototypical word smoothed the passage of their integration into Protestant culture.
Is anybody holding another microphone?
Did you turn yours off?
But by the second half of the 20th century, the Holocaust had broken the spell of German philosophy and culture over modern Jewish thought, and the significant contribution of Jews to modern art in Europe and the United States was becoming ever less deniable. It was further becoming apparent to several Jewish commentators that far from suppressing Jewish art, the second commandment's prescription of idolatrous images, that is, not all and any images, could actually produce art. Now, in this lecture, I want to show you what sort of images are produced because of the second commandment, not in spite of it. I'm going to argue that intentionally Jewish art takes active measures to prevent captivity to idols or false ideas. In other words, I'm not talking about iconoclasm, which might be characterized as a violent fantasy of unmediated access to truth. I'm not talking about vandalizing everyone else's objects of veneration other than your own. I'm talking about how art might prevent captivity to false ideas, might be resistant to ideology. Now, one way that Jewish art does that is by refusing to render beauty as the perfection of the human. An artist, according to Jewish law, must not depict the beauty of human beings in ways that compromise their humanity. Jewish art, instead, bears witness to human finitude. Its images have pathos. Jewish images of the human locate beauty, I'll argue, in the endurance of history, not in its brute conquest. Jewish images limit power, not by violence, but by aesthetic subversion and irony, and they assume the natural transience of beauty and the beauty of transience, so preventing the alienation of beauty from the human by its commodification. So in other words, I'm going to outline to you several different ways in which I believe Jewish art to be prophetic and liberative. Stephen Schwarzschild, in 1975, was one of the first of several commentators who characterized Jewish art as actively counter-idolatrous. This was an approach which he traced back to early rabbinic rulings, early medieval rabbinic rulings, that had been restated in the 16th century by Rabbi Joseph Caro in his codification of Jewish law, the Shulchan Aruch. Now here, two-dimensional paintings of human figures are judged to be permissible, halachically permissible, as long as the artist takes pains to visually prevent their being mistaken for gods. In particular, the face, where the image of God is made manifest, must be incomplete, defaced, or broken, made just a little less beautiful by being given, say, only one eye or a chipped nose, a little slit in the ear. Now, this is not to say that the rabbis are hostile or indifferent to art. On the contrary, in the early 20th century, Rav A.I. Cook wrote a letter to the founder of the Bezalel Academy of Art and Design in Jerusalem. And he described the new school of art there as a sign of life and hope, salvation and comfort. He continued, "Our nation looks well on the sweet beauty of art. However," he says, "this relationship is also limited. As we draw close with the left hand, we push away with the right." Nor is nor are rabbinic attitudes to the aesthetic hostile to physical beauty. In fact, the first sight of a heart-stoppingly beautiful person, animal, or tree is the proper occasion of a blessing. Though I have to say that some rabbis are of the view that men shouldn't make the blessing on seeing a heart-stoppingly beautiful woman because they shouldn't be looking admiringly at women other than their wives. But having said that, the credit for physical beauty goes to its divine creator, not its bearer. And when making an image of a person, it is a category mistake to advert to their spirit by means of adverting to the beauty of their body. Therefore, when making an image of a living person, at least, and of course to make an image of a corpse is not something that a Jewish artist would countenance. Therefore, when making an image of a living person, at least one minor physical imperfection must be introduced, halakhically speaking. The subtraction of beauty, something missing, absent, or flawed in the features, is a way of diffusing the glory or power of a figurative image. Even a subtle flaw in an image of a person prevents, I will argue, the ideological abuse of beauty. Imperfection draws attention to the finitude of the human and prevents its representation from exceeding its own bounds, from becoming anything more than a created image of an image of God. However, the required distortion, I do want to emphasize, is subtle rather than clumsy or aggressive. And this is a consequence of the rabbinic permission to mock idols, and the emphasis being on the word mock rather than to take a hammer to them. So we subvert by wit, not violence. And of course, those who, like diaspora Jews, are not equipped to resist, historically, power with arms, we have at least been able to puncture the hubristic pretensions of tyrants by rendering those pretensions merely laughable or absurd, as any pretension to human omnipotence must be. Grisha Bruskin's Aleph Bet tapestry of 2006, the detail here is a larger piece of it, plays with this rabbinic aesthetic I've described. So does Art Spiegelman's cartoon Mouse of 1980 to 92. But let's start with the most familiar example of Jewish art's subjection of the human head to this apparent indignity, and this is the bird's head Haggadah. The earliest surviving Ashkenazi Haggadah, illuminated in Germany in about 1300, which uses birds' heads, blank faces, veils, helmets, crowns, or even rear views to portray the human face. Now, in 2013, Mark Epstein published a theory that seemed to overturn previous readings of the manuscript as exemplifying a counter-idolatrous aesthetic of distortion of the sort that I've just described. He claimed, rightly I think, that the birds' heads are not in fact birds' heads. With their neat little mammalian ears, they are those of griffins, he thinks, a composite of a lion and an eagle, which was in this period emblematic of social power, distinction, and statesmanship. Far from subjecting Jews to counter-idolatrous ridicule, this visual text, suggests Epstein, asserts the social nobility of chosenness. The Jews are, after all, very old family. Now, while Epstein would be the first to acknowledge that it's actually possible to know what 700 years ago its creators intended, I think that the manuscript is still, nonetheless, using a halakhic device to stabilize the anthropology of the text and its readership. The griffins' heads play on the ironic doubleness of Jewish standing as at once socially ignominious and theologically elevated, both outcast and elect. A helpful exposition of disfigurement in art as signalling several things at once is offered by Mark Taylor in his 1992 study, Disfiguring Art. He's with us today. Say whether I've used him correctly. Taylor's elucidation of three ways in which some of the most creative painters and architects of the late 20th century practiced disfiguring helps us, I think, to understand how it's practiced in the Jewish context, where it's halakhically mandated. Taylor notes that to disfigure is first to design, design, by removing figures, symbols, designs and ornaments. It's also second, to mar, deform or deface, and thus to destroy the beauty of a person or object. And lastly, it is an unfiguring that impossibly figures the unfigurable. The interstitial figure is neither erased nor absolutized, but is used with and against itself to figure that which eludes figuring. Torn faces, and I'm quoting Taylor here, mark the trace of something else, something other that almost emerges in the crack of faulty images. I think that the Jewish art of incompletion and distortion achieves the third of these through the second. Just as the Lurianic Kabbalah images the creation of the cosmos as a breakage in the heart of God, Jewish art's creations emerge in the cracks of faulty images, in the space between figuration and abstraction. In particular, the subtraction of formal beauty from the human figure ensures that a human being, an image of a human being, who is, of course, ontologically interstitial, as being neither fully angel nor beast, cannot be mistaken for an image of a god. Now, Clement Greenberg was perhaps the best known of the mid-20th century Jewish art critics, who regarded Jewish art as inevitably tending to aniconic abstraction. In fact, most Central and Eastern European Jewish art is not, modern art, is not abstract at all. In fact, much of it is documentary and witnesses to the plight of the Jew as Luftmensch. So Luftmensch, the man of air, person of air, the stranger, the refugee, the peddler, the poor and the persecuted. These are figures well known to Jewish art, obviously often represented by Chagall as well. This is a painting by Moisey Minkowski after the pogrom, 1910. Such paintings also, I think, come under the halakhic rubric of distortion, though here the figures have been damaged not by the artist, but by history, which by the mid-20th century had turned the Luftmenschen to Luft. These images cannot be mistaken for idols, the figures in them, because they have pathos, which false gods and eerily perfect faces and figures do not. Only a finite face faces loss. A Jewish image of a Jewish faith cannot be beautiful, I would argue, in the classic sense of its enjoying a perfect economy of symmetries. The face of classical beauty is an imperviously serene image to which nothing has happened and nothing is demanded. But theologically, a suffering face is expressive of just that, a passion. It suffers or undergoes the unlovely afflictions of history as the servant of its redemption. Or let's not over-valorize suffering. It's also simply a face that suffers insofar as it lives. It has a narrative, a story, passion. The messianic face, then, cannot be closed or finished by its own beauty. It must be something of a black square. Here's one that I saw painted in the hall of a building that I looked into one morning walking near Machane Yehuda Market in Jerusalem. This painted black square remembers the unimaginable losses of the fall of Jerusalem in 70 CE, and messianically speaking, observes that Jerusalem is not yet rebuilt. And yet, as the the visual keystone of the arch, this black square, keeps the house of Israel standing. Very difficult for you to see this on the slide, I suspect, but the Holocaustal face, arguably, is another black square. This is Aaron Glusker's 1991 Man and Name, Jakob Dickerman, in which the erasure of the face is witnessed, judgment pronounced, and resurrection from the darkness just glimpsed. There is great beauty in the Jewish face, and of course I think there is. It does not signal immortality, nor is it a mark of divine favor, but of endurance. Leviticus 23 requires, "And you shall take unto yourselves on the first day of Sukkot a fruit of a beautiful tree." Beautiful here, hadar. The rabbis in Sukkot 35a ask, what tree might this be? And what makes it beautiful? Hadar. They conclude that the beautiful tree must be the etrog tree. In case you haven't seen one. And they conclude this because the fruit isn't seasonal, but dwells continuously all year on the tree. Hadar not only meaning splendid, but that which dwells, hadar. Beauty then here is that which remains standing. Through blistering heat and cold rain, the etrog tree persists and yields fruit. Similarly, as Joshua Schmidtman notes, when Leviticus 19 commands us to stand up in honor of the face or presence of the elderly, the word again used for honor here is hadar, which is the word for beauty. We are being encouraged to find beauty in an old face, the beauty of that which has endured. Rabbi Yochanan used to stand up and contemplate or look into the faces of the old, Jewish and pagan alike, and say, how many troubles have passed over these. So when Jewish art troubles the still waters of human beauty, this is not to be confused with any uglification of the world or any reductive violation of human sanctity. On the contrary, where history and time erase beauty from the face, the rabbinic aesthetic of distortion and incompletion makes a bid for the conservation and restoration of spirit from the very ruins of beauty. Just as Auschwitz was not the terminus of our history, which is unfinished, the disfigurement of perfection knows our brokenness, the brokenness of the human, not just of the Jew. But it knows that brokenness to belong to a messianic aesthetic of incompletion, whose God is the unbounded God of our futurity, always both with us and going on before, the one called I will be who I will be. So the cancellation of beauty as a perfection, even to the point of its contraction into a black square, isn't the abolition of beauty, but its memory and its deferral. The black square that faces you as you open the door and ascend the stairs is at once the catastrophic black hole of absolute loss and an aperture or gate onto the future. It is perhaps, I hesitate to say this, as close as any Jew might get to seeing the face of God. Of course, theology doesn't always qualify or supersede history in modern Jewish art. For the Polish Jewish artist Marian S. Marian, Pinchas Burstein, the trauma of surviving Auschwitz, he did, and he didn't survive it, the random chance of his being the only one of his family to survive, produced a huge body of work. Here are a couple of pieces. One here on the left is a diptych oil on canvas, untitled, 1975. The other is a personage with donkey's ears, 1962. The Jewish artist Irving Petlin, a close friend of Marianne's, once remarked, I quote, "He made pictures like other people throw up. They were literally spewed out, one after another." Paintings of what Marianne called his personages were often completed in a single day. These truth paintings, as he referred to them, were an unrelenting assault on human beauty. They so truthfully represented, in fact, sort of sicked up Auschwitz's dehumanization of both victim and perpetrator, that it became impossible for Marianne, and perhaps for us looking at the paintings, to tell the tormentor and the tormented apart. He committed suicide in 1977 in the Chelsea Hotel, New York. But in idoloclastic Jewish art, the human figure made in the image of God not only subscends, but also transcends the representation of its form. The consuming glory, the kavod, of the human figure must be honored as well as withdrawn. This is David Blomberg's Hero Israel, 1955. And here, the proscription of idolatry protects as well as contains glory by placing a notional fence around the face. This can be done, of course, as I said, by a bird's head, by a cloud, by a cloth. In Blomberg's painting, he illustrates this interplay of revelation, the revelation of glory in the human face and the hiding of glory through a talit. Marianne's personages do not defer or conceal their glory. They've been stripped of it forever. Here, Blomberg's figure is almost consumed by glory, but it is a glory that is not the glory, that is transcendent rather than substance. Now, naturally, I'm aware that this rather prescriptive and theological account of Jewish art wouldn't meet the approval of all contemporary historians of Jewish art, or even very many of them. Generally speaking, the recent consensus is that there are no unifying theories of Jewish art. Aaron Rosen has argued that definitions of Jewish art are doomed to failure or overqualification. Jewish art, he says, is part of a general history of Western art, including explicitly Christian art and iconography, and he says it has very few genuinely exclusive claims to particular characteristics. Well, if granted, Jews are hardly the only people who testify against idols, and the introduction of flaws into, say, illuminated manuscripts is sometimes found for similar reasons in the Christian and Islamic traditions. But ultimately, I don't agree with Aaron. I think that there is a Jewish art, but if a Jewish art is defined, as in the Rabbinic Midrash, as one who testifies against idols, if, as Kenneth puts it, the litmus test for being a Jew is seeing things in the created order for what they are, natural objects of finite value and duration, then I think that the second commandment must be allowed to define what is Jewish about Jewish art, namely that its images testify against idols. If we define a Jewish artist as one who intends the Jewishness of her or his work, painting is not just about painting, and the job of the Jewish artist is no more that of creating an image of a beautiful face or body than the purpose of God was to create beautiful people. God has created us, after all, to flourish together. We stand under moral, not aesthetic, judgment. modern artists who happen to have been Jewish, and like, say, Bronzier, Pinel, have painted very beautiful nudes or very beautiful faces. I think that a painting of a nude or a face is Jewish insofar as its intentions are, loosely speaking, prophetic. Let's take, for an example, Lucian Freud's portrait of the Queen, called Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth I, who's painted in 2001. Now, Freud probably wouldn't have thanked me for interpreting this as a piece of Jewish art, but quite literally, it cuts monarchical power down to size. The canvas is exceptionally small, laughably small, 15 by 23 centimeters. Far too much of its very limited space is taken up by the fabulous diamond-encrusted crown, its power surely corrected by the pudgy face that has assumed it. Now, Judaism knows a king to be glorious. The blessing for seeing a king is, blessed are you, God, King of the universe, who has given of his glory to flesh and blood. That is, a king remains as subject to the law as anyone else, including the laws of nature and time. The anthropology of Genesis 1 is revolutionary. Unlike other ancient Near Eastern anthropologies, everyone, male and female, made in the image of God, not just the emperor. And I think that Melamed and Komar's lithograph, Girl and Stalin, 1992, also lets down the tires of human power by wit and irony. Here, Stalin, whose great terror gave him godlike power over who would live and who would die, has become such a big head, so vain, that he's turned into a giant balloon that even a child, a little girl, can lift and pop. He's no more now than a ghastly Halloween lantern carved from a hollow wood. Now, this prophetic deflation of the inflated head can serve as a powerful critique of another kind of totalitarianism, that of our contemporary mass culture, which is saturated with images of women whose super or post-human alien beauty signifies access to spaces of power and privilege so great that they promise triumph over time, even mortality itself. And what I want to argue now is that in this cultural context, halakhically broken images countermand the surgical and technological alienation of human difference. But this is another kind of killing, this time one that bonds a mask onto the face, suffocating what Kierkegaard would call its historical beauty, by covering it over with the same fixed, bronzed face of a god. And here, broken images are antidotes to images of surgically or digitally immortalized faces, usually female, whose unearthly beauty depletes our aesthetic ecology, that is so homogenized and superimproved that our collective memory of the human face in time begins to fade. Maimonides once mourned his own early medieval culture's idolatrous forgetting of God. Now, after the modern death and forgetting of God, later modern cultures posting of alienated images of beauty also teach us not only to forget the human, but to despise it. Ours is a culture whose glorification of the image leads to widespread self-disgust, particularly among younger women. Women particularly try to make the me look like the her. But of course most of us will fail. As time goes on, it becomes impossible for the human face and body to measure up to its idea, culturally reproduced in images. Contemporary photographic representations of faces that have, in all senses, fixed beauty and put it up for sale to a global market are literally captivating. They arrest the fleeting shadow of the divine as it passes as a cloud of glory over the face. These silent images, as the Hebrew Bible notes of idols, lach ruach, spirit, the reverberation of divine presence through history, the coming of God, the cultural adulation and mimetic replication of an industrialized human beauty rendered in fillers and freezes hardens the heart, as the Hebrew Bible would put it, because it occludes the dialogical speech that is the living face under the commandment to love. By contrast, this mask-like face, not of course the actual nameless woman who was employed as its model, is the face of death. For what cannot die, cannot live, has never been born. Emmanuel Levinas helps us to think about beauty and death in art. Art, Levinas says, proceeds as if death were never dead enough. Levinas insists that in contrast to an image of a face, the actual face is a revelation whose brute nudity is a moral summons commanding absolute authority, absolute responsibility for its care. Its infinity can't be reified into an image to be merely enjoyed. Face is not entertainment. What is required is not the disengagement of a contemplative, beatific vision, he says, but a donation of the self to the other. It's no coincidence that one of the very few artists that Levinas did admire was Sasha Sosno, whose art of obliteration, that was his phrase, art of obliteration, left heads unfinished, requiring others to complete the image in their imagination alone. Sasha Sosno's many versions of the Tête Carrée from the mid-1990s onwards, and other such works in which I think Athens and Jerusalem confront each other literally head-on, Judaize the opacity of the pagan marble or bronze head. The square head on the left literally blocks the objectifying gaze. The one on the right, in all senses, allows us to see through beauty. It marks the passage of spirit. The breaking of the figure of beauty's idea is also evident in the work of Jewish feminist artists like Jonas Demo, which since the 1970s has insisted on women's real, living, changing, and therefore imperfect embodiment. Her hyper-realist self-portraits are painted from photographs that she takes herself by pointing the camera lens down to a naked body that is inalienably her own. These are so different to the contemporary selfie. Her unflattering point of view is that of a sexual subject who refuses the idealization of the female body as the mere object of an aestheticizing gaze. This is Pink Fingertips from a series painted between 1974 to 9. And in her later work, she actually produces far more explicitly iconoclastic attacks on the mass production of the female with works like Hot Lips and Stacked, which image women as mannequins. Or again, Laurie Simmons in works like The Love Doll in 2009 to 11. Simmons makes halachically prescribed, three-dimensional, full-body sculptures of women to protest the commodification of female beauty as a mail order purchase. And as I read her, she urges us to observe the second commandment by breaking it. There is one final element of the Jewish prophetic aesthetic that I would like to present today. And it's that which locates beauty in the transience, not the substance of persons and things. Here, a work of art can be created in the moment of its destruction and destroyed in the very moment of its creation. This is the Jewish artist Woodstock Mehta, who is in the photograph staging in 1961 an auto-destructive, disintegrative art event on the South Bank in London. And this is a recreated piece that remembers the disintegrative piece, which obviously doesn't exist anymore, that was made in 1961 from the application of hydrochloric acid on nylon. Metzger later said of the work, I quote, "The important thing about burning a hole in that sheet was that it opened up a new view of across the Thames of St. Paul's Cathedral. Auto-destructive art," he said later, "was never merely destructive. Destroy a canvas and you create shapes." This is something he's continued to do in 2012. He produced Null Object, a bit of stone with a hole drilled into it by a robot. Beauty is not the property in Metzger's work of an art object, which, because he critiques the idea of beauty as an asset, as a rarity that sets its market value. His works are made from valueless materials such as nylon and newsprint, and as such they mount a revolutionary attack on capitalism's commercial and militaristic values as the true disfigurement of beauty. God, as Kohelet 3 puts it, has made things beautiful in their time. And of course, it's not Metzger quoting the Torah here, but if we compare Psalm 102, even the heavens will wear out and be changed like garments. This transience is again evoked, beauty of transience, in the Talmud's crowd of angels that are born in every instant, raise their voices in praise, and pass into nothingness on the very day of their creation, in Hagigah 14a. Here again, beauty is havel, fleeting, although that Hebrew term is also usually translated as vain, can also mean fleeting. So, to conclude, Hegel was both right and wrong in his anti-Semitic denial of aesthetic sensibilities to the Jews. He was right insofar as Jews are not, I would argue, aesthetes. Beauty in art, as distinct from actual persons, is properly flawed. But he was wrong to see Jews as sunk in servitude to a grossly material law governing a world to which they offer no freedom of idea or spirit to transform. On the contrary, modern and contemporary Jewish artists' disfiguration of the figure is also its transfiguration. After all, a disfigured or defaced piece of art creates two canvases, in a sense, in one, two surfaces. a second piece over the first piece that interprets that first piece of art. But this disfigurement that I've described as presaging transfiguration is no mere translation of flesh to spirit, immanent to transcendence, massivity to grace. It's a highly embodied aesthetic. It's an aesthetic bid for the messianic freedom of idea and spirit in this actual world from a variety of actual ideological tyrannies. It's not about freedom from the natural order. And it's an aesthetic that I think thereby is one rather well suited to the immediate crises and alienations of our age.